rather than looking at it potentially as just you and your spouse and then your kids, how do you then incorporate them into it? Have that legacy mindset, because it'll help you make better decisions, I think, because it's not just thinking about you, it's thinking about the future and the future generations as well too.
Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics such as investing, cash flow, budgeting, saving, passive income, debt management, and much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Bills, here we are. We are back again, back on the podcast and back delivering a whole heap of value to our listeners.
Andrew, we are, and I've got a really big smile on my face because I was just reviewing the topic that we're going to talk about, and I swear you've generated this topic for you. Right? This is so this is quite selfishly Andrew's topic essentially.
It's too late now though, so there's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing I can do to, potentially bypass the situation. So,
too late.
Exactly right.
So what we're talking about is the real cost of raising kids in Australia. And the reason why I say it's for Andrew is because he's a smidgen away for him and Stacey having their second child. So, yeah.
2 weeks away, 2.5 weeks away at recording. So yeah.
By the time this gets published,
hopefully would have already happened.
There we go. Andrew, let me tell you, I mean, my kids are 15 and almost 12. You're finished.
Yeah.
That's the end of the podcast. That's it. Done. Wrap it up. Thanks, everybody. It was good. Andrew, where do we start? What's the true lifetime cost of raising a child?
Look, I think the first thing is when you're starting.
And the answer can't be too much.
No, it's not enough because we love them so much, Billy, that we would give them everything. No, I mean, look, I think when you're starting to talk about this, we can talk about averages, but it really will heavily depend on your lifestyle. It really heavily depends on what you want to do and what it is that you financially want to give your kids, whether that be from an education standpoint or whether that be from, assistance in intergenerational wealth and how much that, for argument's sake, parents are dipping into their own pockets to help children afford and buy property, for argument's sake. So, yeah, I mean, look, when we talk about averages, and break down the average cost of raising a child in Australia, the number tends to range from about $450,000 to $600,000. Mm-hmm. Now, that's obviously from age birth until the age of 18. If we talk about in our experience what that number is, it's significantly higher. And I think that that's probably because when you're talking to people that want to receive financial advice and want to grow their wealth, they're probably not necessarily at an average point and they're probably wanting to achieve more than the average. So it's a significant sum of money. I mean, most families will tend to have probably a couple of kids, potentially even more. So you expand that cost out, and it's another thing that you just need to factor in, and you need to be able to work into your budget, work into your cash flow, and work into your strategy, which is hence the reason that we're having this conversation around what are some of the things that, the obvious ones that you think about, but also some of the things that are not necessarily obvious from a cost side of things.
Yeah. And there's probably three things that I want to add to it. The first one is, how do you put a positive spin on this? Because that's a big number. So I kind of figured that you're just prepaying your aged care expenses, right? So you pay it to your kids and then they pay it back when they look after you when you're old and grey, right?
I don't know.
Hopefully.
Do they look after you when you're old and grey, or do they just stick you into an aged care facility and you pay double the cost?
So that's the positive spin. The second point that I wanted to raise was, I mean, you were talking about from birth until age 18, but realistically, it doesn't stop at 18. In most instances, it doesn't stop at 18. I guess more traditionally, back in the day, we could almost say that when kids were 18, they were an adult, they'd leave the house, they'd go and rent and sort of start their own lives. That's probably not the case that we see anymore for a whole range of different reasons. I mean, cost of living is
because Rex is a Greek family, so you live at home until you're 35.
Well, until you get married, right? So, but a whole range of different things. And then probably the third thing is just to point out that These are just numbers, and it's different for absolutely everybody as well too. So you look at these numbers and you know, they're huge numbers. 0 to age 18, you're talking between 450 and 600. There is such a huge variance in those numbers depending on your financial position, depending on what type of lifestyle that you lead, depending on if you've got the financial capacity to help your children. So there's so much in here. I don't want people to hear that number and absolutely freak out because it is a big number. In terms of some of the things that I guess we can think about that makes such a big difference, and I think this is probably the top one that comes to mind for me anyway, is the education costs associated with children. So you talk about the education system and you go, okay, do they go to the local school? Do they go to a private school? Do they go to a public school? And there's a whole range of different options in between. Andrew, I mean, you're thinking about this now. What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess there's obviously, okay, what do you do from a cost and the funding side of things? Do you go public school? Do you go private school? Do you do a mix of both? And I mean, some of the other interesting ways to think about it, and what I've seen before with clients and spoken through is, okay, the obvious one is, first, if it's a private school, how do you fund it? Now, that can be funded out of cash flow. That can be funded, if you've got the time frame in advance, through things like, you know, a education bond that you can put money aside in a tax efficient way to, you know, help fund that, provided that you've got a long enough time frame in anticipation for it. It can also be funded slightly differently. And, you know, maybe one of the other ways to think about it, and what we've considered for clients is, okay, say that education is going to cost, and these days you're probably talking about private school, Catholic school, or private school or Catholic school from age, or from year 7 up until year 12. And I only know because I've done these numbers and we're, you know, putting it into an education bond personally, but you're talking about an additional expense of circa $250,000, probably at a minimum, just on school fees, excluding, you know, uniforms, camps, blah, 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 blah. All
extracurricular activities.
So you look at that and you say, okay, that's a huge expense just on schooling. So some of the other mechanisms, or one of the other ways to potentially think about it is, I've had clients that have said, okay, rather than spending, say, $250,000 to $350,000 on education, maybe per child, what we're going to do is we're going to sell our family home, buy another family home in an area that has a particular catchment for a very good public school that, you know, still is going to give our kids the biggest opportunity from a education perspective. And that additional money is going to be put towards having a larger mortgage, covering the expenses associated with that. And that will also form an asset base in building equity, so that it's not just money that you spend, but rather money that also does two things, because what we then talk about is balancing kids' opportunities with your own financial goals, and it kind of starts to tick both of those boxes.
Yeah.
Not necessarily right for, you know, everybody. It's probably not even right for most people, but it's just another option, another way to think about it, another way to be able to try and, you know, strike a bit of a balancing act.
Yeah, and that's a good conduit into the oxygen mask analogy. But before I jump onto that, I've got a bit of a story. I'm going to go on a sidetrack here. So just with the private school fees, I mean, in the experience that I have of talking to clients, like once you've made that decision, and let's say you do it from year 7 through year 12, so you're talking a 6-year time frame. Once you've made that decision, I find it's a priority in families' lives that they continue to meet that commitment for all of those 6 years. So just keeping in mind that things do change over time, and what does that look like? But the story that I wanted to say is I had a colleague of mine years and years ago, and he was sending his children to a private school, and the business manager called him in. Essentially, that's the fancy name for debt collector, because he was behind on his school fees. Anyway, drives into the school car park, parks his car and what have you, and look, business is a bit tight and I'm a bit behind on my payment, and can we enter into a payment plan and stuff? And they're like, oh, we've noticed that you've driven in a new Mercedes. Why don't you just sell that and pay your school fees? So anyway, he told me that every time he then drove to the school after that, he ends up parking around the corner. So they don't know what type of car he's driving. But yeah, there you go.
While we're on stories, and I think that this, I mean, this is going to sound incredibly entitled, and that's not the intention of what I'm trying to do here. So bear with me when I run through, one of the conversations I was having with a client, and I'll keep it anonymous, a little while ago, probably a couple of years ago, but it really stuck with me. When you start to, talk about private school fees, but also just the nature of earning a good income and what then starts to change in terms of your perception or what you think that you need to do. And what I mean by that is I had a client who was earning a very, very good income. So he's earning $650,000 a year, right? Conversation that we were having was, I earn $650,000 a year. Say approximately, I'm on top marginal tax rate. I also need to pay a Division 293 tax on super contributions, blah, 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 blah. So from a, what's left over side of things, circa $300,000 at the end of it. I've got $300,000. I've got 3 kids. They're all in private school because I earn $600,000. Of course, I'm going to send my children to private school. 40 grand a year each, that takes out 120. All of a sudden, that $300,000 that was left over is $180,000 a year that was left over. I live in a really nice area because
$100,000 mortgage.
Yeah, $100,000 in mortgage repayments because I earn 600 grand. So of course I'm going to live in a nice area. My wife doesn't work because I'm earning this huge income, and for her to go and get a job, she'd probably be only earning 50 to 70 grand a year. So doesn't really make a huge amount of sense to us. All of a sudden, he's like, if you told me X amount of years ago that I'd be earning this income, I didn't think I'd ever have to think about money. I didn't think I'd ever have to worry about budgeting and private school and the area that I live in and still investing and still trying to grow my wealth and still trying to do all of these things. Now, this comes across as incredibly entitled because you look at it and you say, okay, well, you don't need to live in such a nice area. You don't need to send your children to a 40 grand a year private school. You don't need to do all of these things. But it just goes to show that being able or balancing, opportunities for your kids, balancing the area that you live in, balancing your own lifestyle is not something that is reserved for people that only earn, below X amount of money. It's a consideration all of the time, irrespective of how much money you earn, and trying to balance out, doing the right thing to give your kids opportunities and your own goals is forever going to be an issue because there's always something that you can aspire to, irrespective of how much.
Yeah, no, look, well put. And I think that, that comes down to overcommitting. And, we talk about it all the time. It's not how much you earn, it's how much you keep, right? So big income, in that instance, big expenses. But the danger of overcommitting and using that oxygen mask analogy that I was talking about first is in our minds, and depending on which types of clients that you talk to, they have a different approach. But in our opinion, you need to look after your own financial security first. So you need to put your own oxygen mask on first, like they tell you in a plane, before you can help others, right? So that then leads to the danger of overcommitting, which is what you were talking about before, whether it's private school, extracurricular, holidays, you name it, it all falls into the same category. But really trying to dig into that and say, change the mindset a little bit around, I earn a big income, so therefore I must have an overseas holiday every year and fly business class, or I must send my kids to private school, or I need to have an expensive European car, or whatever it may be. So I think it's having the trade-off between a values-based decision, not a guilt-based one, and just being like an investment decision, trying to take the emotion out of it, right? Because it's all good and well that you're earning this big income, but that noose around your neck, those repayments, that commitment that you need to make each and every month is really substantial. And it wouldn't take much in that instance. All it would take is a disruption to income before the wheels start to fall off. Now, I don't know the circumstances, but the expenses are quite high. Private school, 10 grand a month in mortgage repayments, you name it, doesn't take too much. So really understanding your needs and your position and what the commitment looks like and making sure that you're not overcommitting to try and get your kids into a certain position from that perspective, because I don't think it does anybody any good if that's the case. If it's too far one way or the other, I don't think it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill's future-proofing. So how do you, make sure milestones in the future you're accounting for? Things like helping them out for a car.
Yeah.
Child takes a gap year. I mean, I don't know if you're going to be funding that, but, uni expenses, helping with a first home deposit, like, what do you start to consider when you're thinking about
there's really a couple of ways that I tend to approach it. So the first is, one, having an awareness around what that looks like. Because what we had just described previously, it was kind of like, okay, age 0 to age 18. The truth is, in most households, it doesn't stop at 18. It continues for a period of time, and hopefully it decreases as the children turn into adults and become more independent. So having an awareness around what that looks like and being realistic about the level of support that you want to help them with. So as an example, we've put our kids through schooling. That's great. We've raised them, provided a house for them. Hang on a sec. I know how detrimental it can be to start your working career if you've got HECS debt or help debt. So if I'm in a position as a parent, as a family unit, should we do that for our children? Can we do it? Yes. Okay. Tick. Maybe. Then you go one step further and go, okay, car or a gap year. How far do you go? Really depends on, I guess, your financial position as a family, and what does that then look like in terms of what do you want to achieve for your child and the impact that it's going to have on you as a family unit. But ultimately, I think what it comes down to is having an awareness that that's going to be the case in the future, regardless of what it looks like. Thinking ahead, starting early. And most of the time, when your head's down in the thick of it, living life, juggling expenses, just doing your thing, sometimes it's hard to lift your head up and look at the horizon. So engaging with a financial advisor, that's one of the things that we always talk to people about, is looking at the future. Have you considered that? Have you thought about this? And the reason why we do that is the earlier you start, it's easier to hit the target and get a better result if you start earlier. So I think having an awareness around it, figuring out a plan, starting, and away you go, and being realistic about what it is that you want to help your children with. And just to add a little bit more complexity, the housing market that we're experiencing now for first home buyers, it's never been as challenging as it has been in any other time in history, as far as I know, to get into a property, right? So parents are feeling additional pressure to help their children, so to speak, get a leg up into the property market as well.
Yeah, and I think that when you start to run through this, with a client, and when you talk about, getting advice, understanding what it is that you maybe haven't considered or not necessarily think about when you're in the thick of it, I think the other aspect of it is understanding what do you have the capacity to do, and what's going to be the thing that, or what's the priority and what's something that's not necessarily a priority. Because it's all good and well to say, yep, feel the way the wind blow, and I reckon we can do this. But all of a sudden, when you start to put numbers behind it and you start to look at it and say, okay, this is how much of our cash flow needs to go to this in order to achieve that. This is how much of our cash flow needs to go to this in order to achieve that. And one aspect of it is for children, for, all of the things that we spoke about around, helping them for a deposit or a car or, uni or whatever that, expense is going to be. But the other aspect of it is, well, I also need to put money aside to, pay off my mortgage faster because I want to be debt free, at a point in time before I retire. I need to, put money towards long-term wealth creation. I need to put money towards, shorter-term wealth creation. So once you start to pull all of that back and look at the numbers that sit behind it, either one of two things is going to happen, and it's going to be, yep, great, we can achieve everything that we want to achieve. And so long as we stick to this strategy and everything continues, it's going to be fantastic. Or it's, oh crap, we can't do everything. What's the priority? What's really important that's, going to give us certainty around our own wealth creation, and what's, important to help our kids, and what's the fluff on the side that's a nice to have that, hey, if our income increases, if we get a windfall, if something happens, that's certainly going to come back into it and we'll reassess it at a future point. But just right now, it's not feasible.
Yeah.
So starting to put it all together and look at not just, future planning for kids and milestones and all of that stuff, but fitting that into your overall situation as well.
Yeah. Yep. Sort of switching gears a little bit, rather than thinking about the money that you're spending on your children and things, I think helping instill good financial habits into them. So teaching kids about money is such a huge and critical thing, because let's just go back a second, say, okay, you've done all of these great things for your children. They were very fortunate that you're in the position to be able to have the foresight and the financial capacity to do all of that. Fantastic. They start their career, no HECS, no debt, clean slate. Maybe you've helped them with a property, who knows, whatever. If you haven't taught them about money, then they're going to struggle.
Credit dependency.
They're going to struggle,
yeah,
right? So pocket money systems, starting that early, investing apps, earning versus spending, needs versus wants, modeling good financial behavior so they can see what it is that, the parents have done, and try and get them to make that correlation between hard work, smart planning and execution, as opposed to, mum and dad just got us everything that we wanted whenever we wanted, and we had this great lifestyle, and not recognizing the connection between the two. Almost to a certain extent, you have to pay it forward, because like anything, you need to educate them so then they can live that for themselves. And then if it's for the next generation or what have you, pass that on. But there's no point in doing all of this good work if you don't then teach your children how to carry that forward for themselves.
Or if you don't do that, you go back to the old adage, what is it? First generation earns it, second generation saves it, third generation blows it.
Fourth generation's homeless.
I think that the other consideration, and, is another sort of topic in itself, is that if you're doing all of this stuff and if you're doing all of this planning around expenses for kids and also your own wealth creation, you do need to factor in your own risk protection as well, because all of that is generally reliant on one thing, and that's income continues to come in. So making sure that you've got, solid insurances, a solid risk mitigation strategy in all of this to make sure that even if, the proverbial were to happen, that there's a backup plan in place and there's something that you can do in order to, pull the lever to make sure that everything can either continue happening or go on autopilot for a period of time.
Yeah, no, like it, love it. Lastly, just all of that combined, thinking about how you build a long-term family wealth strategy, essentially. So rather than looking at it potentially as just you and your spouse and then your kids, how do you then incorporate them into it? Have that legacy mindset, because it'll help you make better decisions, I think, because it's not just thinking about you, it's thinking about the future and the future generations as well too. And if you've got the foresight, if you've got some assistance, I think it's a lot easier to do this, because conceptually thinking about it, there's a few balls in the air and there's a lot of pressure when the proverbial rubber hits the road, so to speak. How do you do it? What does it look like? I think if you get some support, someone to help guide you through that, it's definitely an easy way to create a sustainable plan to build wealth over time and over future generations.
Yeah, exactly right. So get advice, speak to someone, understand, how to put together your strategy and bundle it all together.
That's it. And hopefully have some fun along the way, and don't stress about money too much with the cost of private school fees, Andrew.
Exactly right.
Or the cost of another mouth to feed.
Well, with Scarlett going to high school next year, your rubber is definitely hitting the road, Bills.
This is true. This is true.
2 milestones for me and Billy.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, thank you for today. To our listeners and our viewers, hope you got a whole heap of value out of that. If you're in a similar position, or if something that we spoke about resonates and you want to find out more, reach out to Andrew and myself. Details are in the show notes.
Bills, thanks again, and look forward to catching everyone on the next podcast.
Thanks. Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au. The information in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal objectives, financial situation, or needs. It is not financial, legal, or tax advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should consider whether the information is appropriate to your circumstances and seek professional advice before acting on any of the information provided. Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd.
authorized representatives and credit representatives of Akumin Financial Planning Pty Ltd.